She was not supposed to be there. That was the first thing Lynda Bonner told herself as she smoothed the front of a dress she had never asked for, in a hall she had never wanted to enter, surrounded by women who had been groomed their entire lives for exactly this moment. The Ember Court was the most beautiful place she had ever hated. Gold everywhere. Chandeliers dripping with amber crystal. Wolves in silk and velvet moving across a floor so polished, she could see the ceiling reflected in it. Somewhere above the great staircase, the king's selection fire burned in its iron bowl, ancient, amber-colored, and older than every law in the kingdom. The smoke from it rose in a slow, curling column toward the rafters. It had been doing that since before any living wolf could remember. And every year, at the Ember Court, it would find its direction. It would drift. It would settle. And whoever it settled over would become the Alpha King's chosen Luna, not by the king's hand, not by any council's vote, but by fire's choice, which was, according to every tradition the kingdom held sacred, the only choice that mattered. Lynda had been told all of this by her guardian, Harlan Finch, in the carriage ride over, in the same tone he used when explaining why she had to attend lessons she despised and eat meals she had not requested and smile at men she found deeply uninteresting. The tone of a man who did not consider her feelings a relevant factor. She had smiled and said nothing, and she had spent the entire ride memorizing the exits. There were 3. She had found all of them within the first 10 minutes of arriving. She had not planned to use any of them. She had planned, in the vague and non-committal way she planned most things she did not want to do, to stand in her row, let the smoke ignore her as it always ignored her, because she was not noble by name, not wealthy by inheritance, and not connected to any of the great packs by blood, and then go home and pretend none of this had happened. The smoke had not agreed with that plan. It had curved midair. It had come toward her in a slow, certain, terrifying arc, and every head in the hall had turned to follow it. 500 wolves watching a column of amber light move toward a girl in a borrowed dress, with no title, and no land, and no earthly reason to be chosen. For one full second, Lynda had stood very still. Then she had done the only thing that made any sense to her. She turned around and walked out. She did not run. Running, she knew from years of practice, was the thing that made people chase you. Running announced fear. Running said, I know I am wrong, and I am hoping speed will save me from the consequences. Lynda Bonner was afraid. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her jaw. But she had learned a long time ago to keep fear inside her chest where it belonged, and let her face do something else entirely. She walked the way her mother Clara had taught her to walk. Head level, spine straight, shoulders soft. Not the walk of a girl who was fleeing. The walk of a woman who had somewhere more important to be. The servants' corridor behind the east tapestry smelled of tallow and cold stone. She followed it by instinct, her fingertips brushing the wall in the dark, and came out through a low iron door into the side courtyard where the hired carriages waited in rows. The night air hit her face, and she stood in it for a moment, breathing, letting the cold fill her lungs and slow the hammering in her chest. Behind her, somewhere inside the great hall, there would be chaos. She did not need to see it to know. The smoke had chosen, and the chosen had left, and in the history of the Ember Court no one had ever done that. Not once. Not in 300 years of the ceremony. She found a gray horse tethered near the stable gate. She did not have permission to take it. She took it anyway. She told herself it was borrowing. She told herself she would send it back with a note of apology. She told herself a great many things in the first 30 seconds of riding that horse into the tree line, and most of them were generous interpretations of what she was actually doing. She was running away, not from the king. She had never seen the king. He had not come down the staircase tonight. Someone had told her earlier, some young woman with pearl earrings and hopeful eyes, that King Ignis never came down until the smoke had settled. He waited upstairs. He let fire choose for him. And then he appeared at the top of the staircase and smiled at his future Luna, and the court applauded, and the music began. Lynda had thought, listening to pearl earrings explain this with reverence, that it was one of the stranger things she had ever heard. A king who let fire make his most significant decision. A king who did not speak to a single woman in the room before fire pointed and said, that one. She had not said that out loud. She had smiled and nodded and filed the opinion away in the drawer inside her head, where she kept all the things she was not allowed to say in company. The drawer was very full. The horse threw her at a ditch 3 miles into the forest. Not viciously. It simply reached the ditch, assessed the situation with the calm rationality of an animal that had not agreed to any of this, and stopped hard. Lynda went over its neck and landed in cold mud on the far side of the ditch, and the horse turned around and trotted back toward the warm stables it had come from, clearly unbothered. She sat in the mud. She assessed the situation. The mud was very cold. Her dress, cream-colored silk, borrowed from Harlan's wardrobe of useful garments he kept for occasions like this, was ruined from the knee down. She had lost one shoe in the ditch. Her hair, pinned into an elaborate arrangement by Harlan's housekeeper Mabel that morning, had come mostly free on one side and was sitting at an angle that felt significant. She got up. She found the road. She started walking. She had been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when she heard wheels. A carriage, moving slowly through the dark. One driver on the box seat. 2 black horses. No crest on the door. She checked. That was unusual enough that she noticed it. Carriages at the Ember Court all had house crests. A carriage without one meant either old money that did not feel the need to announce itself, or someone who specifically did not want to be recognized. She stepped into the road. The driver hauled back hard. The horses snorted and shifted. The carriage stopped with its front wheel 6 inches from her boots. The driver said something she did not entirely hear because she was already walking past him to the carriage door, which she opened without knocking. Inside, darkness. One small oil lantern swinging from a hook above the seat. Velvet cushions the color of dark wine. Long legs stretched out across the floor, belonging to a figure seated opposite. Tall, dark-coated, entirely still. The lantern light caught one side of a jaw, the line of a shoulder, and nothing else. She got in. She pulled the door shut behind her. The figure did not move. She looked at where his face would be and said, "If you are going anywhere that is not here, I am coming with you. If you are not moving, you are going to have a very uncomfortable few minutes because I am not getting out of this carriage." A pause. Then, from the shadow, "I am going somewhere that is not here." She exhaled. She sat back against the velvet. She folded her hands in her lap so they would stop trembling. "Good," she said. "I apologize for the mud. I had a disagreement with a horse." "Who won?" She looked out the dark window. "The horse." Something moved in the shadow. She thought he might have smiled. Then the carriage shifted as the driver climbed back onto the box, and they were moving. And Lynda Bonner, who had spent her entire life being told to speak less and smile more, opened her mouth in the dark and began to talk. She told him about Harlan Finch first. Harlan was her guardian. Had been since she was 9 years old. When her mother Clara Bonner died of a fever contracted in service to a noble house, she had been summoned to heal. Clara had been the most gifted healer in the valley, known for 3 counties, and the summons had come from a man named Rufus McGraw, a council elder with a sick daughter and the kind of confidence that came from having never been told no. Clara had gone. Clara had healed the daughter. Clara had caught the fever from a stable hand who had not been quarantined properly. Clara had written one letter, and then another, and then had stopped writing letters, and Lynda had waited every morning at the end of the lane for 6 weeks before she understood that her mother was not coming back. The stranger in the shadow said nothing. He did not interrupt. He did not offer the kind of soft, deflective sympathy that most people offered when she mentioned her mother, the quick pivot, the "I am so sorry" that was really a request to change the subject. He simply listened. She found that unusual enough to keep going. She told him about the Ember Court, about the smoke and the ceremony and the way the great hall had been arranged like a display. Women on one side, men on the other, the noble daughters in the front rows, and the lesser-born standing behind them where the smoke was, everyone agreed, unlikely to reach. "It is the oldest tradition in the kingdom," she said, and she heard the edge in her own voice that she could not always smooth away. 500 years of fire making a woman's most important decision for her. 500 years of daughters brought to a hall and arranged in rows and told to stand still and wait while smoke drifts over their heads. And every generation says it is an honor. Every generation polishes it up and calls it sacred and sends their daughters in and waits for fire to point. "You did not find it an honor," the shadow said. "I found it a room full of women who had been told their whole lives that the highest thing they could achieve was to be selected. And a king who has apparently decided that the most efficient way to find a companion for the rest of his life is to outsource the decision to ancient fire and not speak to a single woman in the building. Another pause. She could feel his attention in the dark. Not heavy, not threatening, just present, in the way that full attention always is, like a room where every lamp is lit. "You have an opinion about the king," the shadow said. "I have several." I would hear them. She had always been like this. It was what Harlan hated most about her. This refusal to observe the polite distances, this tendency to say the thing that lived beneath all the careful words. Clara had called it honesty. Harlan called it a liability. In the dark, in a moving carriage, with the cold trees going past the window and no one who knew her name, it felt like neither. It felt like breathing. She said, "He is a man who has never been told no by anyone who did not immediately regret it. The stories say he is cold and remote and proud, and I think all of those things are probably true, because men who arrange the most intimate decision of their lives as a formal ceremony with an audience of 500 generally have no interest in being known. They have an interest in being chosen. There is a large difference." She said, "He lets fire choose for him because fire cannot have a conversation. Fire cannot ask him a difficult question. Fire cannot look at him and see past the crown. The smoke settles. He appears. He smiles. Everyone applauds. And he never has to risk a single real exchange." She said, "And the women who stand in those rows. I thought about them tonight while I was standing there. Some of them were frightened. Some of them were hoping desperately. Some of them had been told by their families that this was their purpose, the whole of their purpose, and I looked at them and I thought, what happens to the ones he does not choose? What story do they go home with? What do they say to their families?" That fire looked at them and found them lacking. Her voice had gone quieter without her noticing. She stopped. The carriage rolled. The lantern swung. "And what story do you go home with?" the shadow said, very softly, "now that you have left." She was quiet for a moment. "My own," she said. "For the first time, my own." The shadow did not answer. But she heard him breathe, a slow, careful exhale, the kind that happens when something lands somewhere unexpected and the person receiving it needs a moment to set it down properly. She looked out the window. The trees were thinning. Lights were rising through them. Many lights, tall and close-set, the kind that belonged to towers. Something moved in the pit of her stomach. "Where are we?" she said. The carriage slowed. She heard the gate ahead before she saw it, the heavy groan of iron hinges, the sound of boots on stone, a voice calling an order. The figure across from her stood. He was taller than the carriage was built for and had to duck his head. He stepped toward the door, and as he passed the lantern it fell on his face for the first time. Full, unhesitating light. A strong jaw, dark hair, a mouth that did not waste itself on unnecessary expressions, and eyes the color of embers, amber brown, still, and so composed that she felt, in the space of one violent second, exactly what she was looking at. Outside the carriage door, two soldiers dropped to one knee. "My king," they said. The silence inside the carriage lasted precisely 3 seconds. Then Lynda said, very quietly, "I would like to state, for the record, that I could not see your face." King Ignis looked down at her. He said, "You called my ceremony a 500-year arrangement for a man who is afraid of real conversation." She did not answer. "You said the smoke chooses for me because fire cannot ask difficult questions." She still did not answer. "You said," he continued, and something crossed his face that was not quite an expression and not quite the absence of one, "that you wanted your own story." He held out his hand. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she climbed out of the carriage on her own and stood in the torchlight of the palace courtyard, one shoe missing, mud to the knee, half her hair coming down, and she met his eyes, and she did not look away. He said, "Come inside. You are cold, and you have lost a shoe." She looked down. She had, in fact, lost a shoe. She had forgotten until this moment. She followed him inside, not because she had to, because her legs were still moving forward when her mind had not yet decided whether they should, and because, in some deep and inconvenient part of her, she was already curious about a man who had sat in the dark for 20 minutes and listened to her dismantle him without saying a word in his own defense. The room they gave her was 3 times the size of any room she had slept in. Stone walls, a fire already lit, a bed with 4 carved posts in dark wood, a small table by the window with bread and soup, still warm, as though someone had anticipated her arrival before she had anticipated it herself. A woman came in shortly after, quiet-footed, gray-haired, kind in the particular way of people who have worked in palaces long enough to see everything and judge nothing. Her name was Leona Cross, and she did not ask a single question about the mud or the missing shoe or the state of Lynda's hair. She simply helped her wash, gave her a plain linen nightgown, and said, "The king asks that you sleep well. He will be in the east breakfast room at first light if you choose to come down. If you choose not to, no one will disturb you." Lynda said, "He doesn't give orders?" Leona considered this. "He gives a great many orders," she said. "Not to guests." Then she left. Lynda stood alone in the firelit room and thought about what she had done. The Ember Court, the smoke, the walk out through the servants' corridor, the horse, the ditch, the mud. 20 minutes in a dark carriage telling a man she had never met that his king was afraid of genuine human contact. His king. She pressed both hands over her face and stood like that for a long time. Then she ate the bread, because she had not eaten since midday, and she sat on the floor in front of the fire, and she thought clearly. She thought about Harlan Finch, about the way he had dressed her for tonight, the way a man polishes a tool before he uses it, about the way he had said, in the carriage, "You will be pleasant, and you will be still, and you will let the smoke decide." Not, "You will be yourself." Not, "You will be fine." You will be pleasant and still. Like furniture. Like something arranged in a room for a purpose that had nothing to do with her. She thought about the drawer full of unsaid things. She thought about what the king had looked like when the lantern light hit his face. Not the cold iron tyrant of the stories she had grown up with, but a man who was tired in a specific way. The tiredness of someone who has been performing composure for so long they could no longer be certain where the performance ended and the person began. She had seen that tiredness before. She had seen it in her mother's face, in the last letter Clara sent. The letter that said only, "I am well. I am needed here. Do not worry." And then nothing. She got up. She walked to the door. She tried the handle. It opened. She stood in the open doorway for a long moment, the warm room behind her and the cool corridor in front, and she understood something that she filed away carefully. He had not locked her in. In a palace full of guards, with a ceremony upended and the entire court in an uproar behind them, he had not locked her door. She closed it. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. In the morning, she went downstairs. The east breakfast room was small. Round table, 2 chairs, a window full of pale morning garden, a fire in the hearth, and King Ignace, in a plain gray shirt with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, reading a document with a cup of something going cold at his elbow. He stood when she came in. She had not expected that. He said, "Lynda Bonner, my king." He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. He sat. There was bread, fruit, a pot of strong tea. A young man, introduced simply as Emmett, poured and disappeared. The door remained open. She noted that too. Ignace said, "I owe you an explanation. You owe me nothing. I was not at the ceremony last night." She looked at him. "My advisor Clyde Voss ran the selection in my name," he said. "He has done so 3 times in the past 4 years. I signed the papers. The ceremony proceeds. I wait upstairs." "Why?" He picked up his cup, set it down again. "Because the ceremony requires a king who is willing to let fire make his choices. And I have not been willing, for some years now, to pretend that I am that man." He paused. "I was in the carriage because I was leaving. Not permanently. Just for a few hours. The forest road is the one place in this kingdom where no one follows me. I ride it when I need to think, and am not permitted to show that I need to think." She was quiet for a moment. "You were running away from your own ceremony. I prefer to call it a strategic withdrawal." She looked at him. Something she had not expected moved through her chest. Not sympathy exactly, and not warmth exactly. Something between the two that did not have a clean name. "The things I said in the carriage," she began, "were almost entirely accurate," he said. "The part about fire making decisions for a man who cannot risk a real conversation. That was precise." She did not know what to say to that. "I am going to be honest with you," he said, "because you were honest with me, and I find I have very little interest in performing anything this morning. You walked out of my ceremony. In 300 years, no one has done that. The court is in considerable distress about it. My advisor wants you returned to your guardian with a sealed letter of explanation that protects the crown's dignity." "And what do you want?" He met her eyes, amber brown and very steady. "I want to know what is in the drawer," he said. She stared at him. What drawer? The one where you keep everything you are not permitted to say? I watched you last night for the 4 seconds before you turned around and walked out. You had a full expression on your face, and then it was gone, and you walked. I want to know what the full expression was. Lynda Bonner sat at the table of the Alpha King in a borrowed dress with one shoe and the remains of a flower crown still pinned to the back of her hair, and she felt something she had not felt in years. Like a window she had kept shut for a very long time had just been opened from the outside. She stayed for 5 days. That was not what she had planned. She had planned, over the bread and fruit of that first breakfast, to have one honest conversation and then find her way back to whatever remained of her life in Harlan Finch's house. She was 20 years old. She had very little money of her own, no family title, no legal independence from her guardian until she turned 22. She had 2 good skills: healing, which she had learned at her mother's side before Clara died, and reading, which she had learned obsessively and alone because books never told her to be pleasant and still. She had plans, modest ones: save enough from the small wages Harlan paid her for managing his household accounts, find a healer's apprenticeship in a town far enough away that he could not easily recall her, build something small and entirely her own. None of those plans included a palace. And yet, on the second day, she was given the run of the library, which was the size of a moderate house and contained more volumes than she had seen in her entire life gathered in one place. She sat in it from the morning bell until she lost track of time entirely, and when a young maid named Maria brought her lunch on a tray and said, quietly, that the king had asked whether she needed a better candle, she felt something odd and inconvenient press against her ribs. He had thought about the light. He had thought about whether she could see properly. On the third day, she found him in the palace's small training yard at dawn, working alone with a wooden practice sword against a straw figure. She had gone there for the quiet, not knowing he would be there. She stood in the shadow of the archway and watched him move without his noticing her, and what she saw was not a king. It was a man who had been trained to survive and had turned that training into a kind of solitude, something he did alone, in the dark, before the rest of the palace was awake, because it was the 1 hour in the day that asked nothing of him except precision. She understood that. She had her own version of it. Hers was figures, household ledgers, the small pleasure of numbers that came out correctly. His was a sword at 5 in the morning. He saw her, stopped, lowered the blade. She said, "Don't stop on my account." He said, "I am surprised you are up. I am surprised you are here and not in a council chamber. The council does not begin for 2 hours." He set the practice blade aside. "Would you like to walk? The garden in the south wing is warmer at this hour." She had been expecting him to go back inside. She had been expecting to be reminded, gently, that she was a guest with a specific and temporary status. She had not been expecting a walk in the garden. "Yes," she said, because she had decided, somewhere around the 2nd hour in the library, to stop preparing for exits and start seeing what was actually in the room. The south garden was full of white flowering shrubs and a stone path that curved around a small pond. They walked it slowly. Neither of them spoke for the first several minutes, and neither of them seemed to find that uncomfortable. She said, "What does Clyde Voss want to do about the ceremony?" "Repeat it," Ignis said. "Smaller. Private. The inner council, a handful of witnesses. He believes the smoke will choose you again. And if I do not want to be chosen, then the ceremony ends differently than he intends." He said it evenly, without drama. Clyde is very capable and has served this palace well for 12 years. He also believes that the crown's continuation depends on solving this particular problem as quickly and cleanly as possible. I do not always share his definition of quickly or cleanly. What is your definition? He was quiet for a moment. The morning light was low and white over the pond. She watched his reflection in the water, long, dark, serious, and waited. "Something that does not require a woman to stand still and let fire point at her," he said finally. She stopped walking. He stopped a step later and turned to look at her. "You genuinely mean that," she said. "I am aware it is an unusual position for a king whose entire succession law is built on that ceremony." "It is," she agreed. "Then, what happened to the 3 women the smoke chose before?" "There was a story. They declined. And then, they were returned to their families," he said, "with appropriate arrangements made. They were not harmed. The stories about what happened to them are Clyde's doing, not mine. He believed the ceremony needed protection. Fear was the protection he chose. She thought about pearl earrings in the great hall, the hope on her face, and underneath the hope, a very particular kind of vigilance. You know people are afraid of you, she said. I know. And you have let them be. Yes. He looked at her directly. Because a court that fears a king does not test him. And I have spent 7 years building a peace in this kingdom that a great many powerful people would prefer to dismantle. Fear has been useful. That is a cold calculation. Yes, he said again. And then, quieter. It is also the thing I am most tired of. They stood by the pond in the pale morning, and Lynda Bonner looked at the Alpha King and thought, there it is. The drawer. His drawer, not hers. Full of things he had been calculating instead of feeling for so long that he had nearly forgotten the difference. She started walking again. After a moment, he fell into step beside her. Their shoulders were very close on the narrow path. Neither of them moved away. The document arrived on the morning of day 4. It was delivered to the king, not to her. She would not have known about it except that she came down the east corridor at the wrong moment and heard Clyde Voss's voice through the half-open council room door, raised, which she gathered was unusual, and then Ignis's voice, very level and very quiet, which she was already learning was the more alarming of the two. She did not stop. She walked past. She went to the library, and she sat with a book open on her lap, and she did not read a word of it. An hour later, Ignis found her there. He sat down across from her, in the chair that had become, without either of them formally deciding it, his chair. He set a document on the table between them. He did not open it. He said, I am going to tell you what is in this. You can read it yourself after, or not at all. That choice is yours. She set the book aside. Your guardian Harlan Finch has been in debt to the crown since before you came to live with him, Ignis said. A financial arrangement made 11 years ago, when your mother was still living. He borrowed against the value of a property he did not own. The debt has been extended twice. The third extension expired 2 months ago. She was very still. The condition of the final extension, he said, was that he would present an unmarried ward of appropriate age at the Ember Court. If that ward was chosen by the selection smoke, the debt would be cleared in full. He paused. The debt is significant. She looked at the document on the table. She did not touch it. He brought me to the court to pay his debts, she said. The words came out flat, the way a verdict comes out. Not a question. Yes. He never told me. No. She thought about the carriage ride, about Harlan smoothing the front of her dress and saying, pleasant and still, about the way he had checked her hair twice and her hands once and had said nothing, nothing at all, about why this mattered so much to him, why this particular night, why this particular ball, why his eyes had not quite met hers since the invitation arrived. She had thought it was disdain. He had always looked at her with something close to disdain, the look of a man who has been given a responsibility he did not choose and has spent years resenting it quietly. She had grown up reading that look so well she had stopped trying to change it. It had not been disdain. It had been the look of a man counting down. Something moved through her that was not quite anger and not quite grief. It was the feeling of a floor dropping away. The feeling of looking back at a room you thought you understood and finding it had always been a different shape. She said, Did my mother know? About the debt. I do not know, Ignis said. The arrangement was made with Harlan. Her name does not appear in the documents. She stood up. She walked to the library window. Outside, the south garden was gray with cloud. The white flowers looked different in flat light, smaller, less certain. What happens to him, she said, if the smoke's choice is never completed? The debt remains. He will lose the property and likely the house. Good, she said. Then, I'm sorry. That is not. It is entirely reasonable, Ignis said. She turned. He was watching her from the chair with that careful amber steadiness, and she realized with a small internal jolt that he was not trying to manage her. He was not offering the careful reframing, the soft redirect that people usually offered when she felt something too visibly. He was simply sitting in the room with her, and the room was large enough for everything she felt, and he was not taking up any more space in it than he needed to. She sat back down. She picked up the document. She read it. When she finished, she set it down and looked at him and said, I want you to know something. Yes. Nothing that came before this room was a choice I made freely. Not the ball. Not the dress. Not living in Harlan Finch's house for 11 years. She held his gaze. So if I stay anywhere from this point, It will not be because of smoke or debt or what someone else arranged. It will be because I decided. Ignis said nothing for a moment. Then, I understand that completely. Do you? Better, he said quietly, than you might expect. The evening conversations became a shape neither of them planned. Every night, after the council meetings and the training and the long hours of the palace's routine, he would find her, in the library or the garden, or once on the stone stairs that led to the East Tower, where she had gone to see the view and stayed for an hour watching the valley lights come on below. He would sit nearby. He would not demand. He would wait to see if she wanted company, and when she did, she would move slightly to make room, and they would talk. They talked about the pack laws and why half of them made her furious. He agreed with her on at least 4 points and quietly told her which counselors he could not yet convince. They talked about healing. She told him what her mother had taught her, not just remedies but method, the particular attention required to see what someone's body was doing before it became a crisis. He asked questions she had not expected him to know how to ask. He told her, one night, about the border war he had inherited from his father. Not proudly, not as a king telling a story of victory. As a man in his mid-20s who had been handed a war at 20 and had sat with the weight of every decision every morning for 2 years and had still not been certain, looking back, that he had made the right ones. I made the ones I could live with, he said. That is a different calculation. She said, that is a fair calculation. He looked at her. Most people would say right or wrong. He said, you said fair. Right and wrong are things you know after, she said. When you are in the middle of something, all you have is whether you can live with it. That is fair. That is the most honest word for it. He was quiet for a long time after that. The fire between them burned down by a log, and neither of them moved to add another. She was aware, in those evenings, of something accumulating. Not slowly, the word was wrong for it. It was more like the way a season turns. You do not notice the exact day. You notice one morning that the light is different, that the air has a different weight, that something has changed without announcing itself. She would catch herself, in the middle of a sentence about something ordinary, thinking, I like the way he listens. I like that he does not perform. I like that he disagrees with me sometimes and does not apologize for it, and does not require me to apologize for disagreeing back. She liked him. That was dangerous. That was, in fact, the most dangerous thing that had happened since she stepped into his carriage. Because liking a king was not a simple thing. Liking a king who was also, by every formal ceremony and legal tradition of the kingdom, supposed to select her, that was a complication with no tidy resolution. She thought about it on the morning of day 5, in the garden, with her hands around a cup of tea that Emmett had brought without her asking, because he had figured out by day 2 how she took it. She was being seen here. That was the thing underneath all the other things. In Harlan's house, she had been managed, accommodated, maintained. Here she was being seen, her actual preferences, her actual hunger, her actual thoughts, and the seeing was so unfamiliar it sat against her skin like a new fabric she had not yet decided whether she trusted. She heard footsteps on the garden path behind her. She said, without turning, Clyde Voss wants to run the ceremony again. Yes, Ignis said, coming to stand beside her. And you? He was quiet for a moment. The valley below the garden wall was gold and green in the morning. A hawk turned lazy circles over the tree line. I do not want to run the ceremony again, he said. What I want is considerably more complicated than a ceremony. She looked at him. I want to know you, he said simply. Not as a Luna candidate. Not as the woman Smoke chose. As Lynda Bonner, who got into my carriage in the dark and told me more truth in 20 minutes than I have heard in 7 years combined. He looked out over the valley. I am aware that wanting is not the same as having the right to ask. I am not asking you for anything. I am only telling you what is true. The hawk made one more circle and dropped into the trees. Lynda held her cup with both hands and felt the warmth of it, and said, What if I am not finished deciding? Then take as long as you need, he said. The door is not locked. It has never been locked. She had checked that. 3 times. I know, she said. That afternoon, Leona Cross brought her a letter. It was from Miranda Doolin, a woman Lynda had met once at one of Harlan's dinners, a quiet, watchful woman who had grown up in the palace serving household and had retired to the valley town 3 years prior. The letter was brief. It said that Miranda had heard Lynda was at the palace, and that she had known Clara Bonner, and that if Lynda wanted to know what had actually happened to her mother in the years after she stopped writing, Miranda was willing to speak. Lynda read it twice. She folded it. She sat with it in her lap for a long time. Then she went to find Ignis. The truth about Clara Bonner arrived not in a letter, but in a room. Miranda Doolin came to the palace the following morning at Ignis's invitation, a detail that made Lynda briefly furious and then quietly moved, because he had not asked her permission and he had not announced it as a gift. He had simply sent word that the woman should come and told Lynda over breakfast and said, "I thought it should be your choice whether to see her, but I wanted the option available." Miranda was a small woman with careful eyes and hands that were always slightly restless. She sat across from Lynda in the East breakfast room, and she said, "Your mother was a good woman. She is the reason I left this palace." Lynda said, "Is she alive?" Miranda looked at her steadily. "She was alive when I left, 3 years ago. She was living in the East Valley, in a healer's cottage near the border town of Haskins Cross. She stopped writing to you because Harlan Finch told her you had been placed with a good family in the north and wanted no contact with the past. He told her you had asked for that specifically." The room was very quiet. "He told her I asked not to hear from her," Lynda said. "Yes." She sat with that for a long moment. It was a different kind of floor-dropping away than Harlan's debt had been. The debt had been about money. This was about 11 years of believing her mother had simply stopped. Stopped writing, stopped fighting, stopped wanting to find her way back. 11 years of a drawer full of grief she had decided to never fully open, because opening it would mean looking directly at the possibility that she had not been worth coming back for. "She thought I chose to disappear from her life," Lynda said. "Yes," Miranda said. "She honored it. She believed you wanted a clean start. She is the kind of woman who would honor a child's wishes even if they broke her." Lynda looked at the table. She looked at her hands, which were very still, which cost her something to keep still. She said, "I need to go to Haskins Cross." Miranda nodded. "I thought you might." She left the next morning. Ignis walked her to the stable himself. He had arranged a horse, her own this time, not borrowed, a steady brown mare named Deborah who would, he said, not throw her at any ditch regardless of its opinion. A guard to the valley border. A leather bag with what she would need for the road. She checked the bag. There was money in it. Enough for the journey and several weeks beyond. She looked up at him. "I did not say I was staying," she said. "No," he agreed. "You said you would decide freely. This is part of deciding freely, having enough to make the decision without it being made for you by an empty pocket." She should have had an answer to that. She did not. "I will be back in 5 days," she said. "Or I will send word." "I will be here," he said. She mounted. She looked down at him in the early morning light. This man who had been a stranger in the dark a week ago, and was now, in some way she could not yet name properly, not a stranger at all. His face was doing the thing she had learned to read over 5 days. The very small, very careful arrangement of features that meant he felt something he was choosing not to show because showing it was not yet his right. She said, "For what it is worth." He looked up. "Yes. The things I said in the carriage. The man who is afraid of real conversation. The man who outsources his choices to fire." She held his gaze. "That is not who I have been talking to this week." Something moved across his face. Quick and unguarded, gone in a second, but she caught it. "Go," he said. "Find her." She went. Haskins Cross was a small border town with a long main road and a healer's cottage at the end of it, set back from the lane behind a low stone wall. Lynda sat on the mare for a full minute outside the gate before she got down. The woman who answered the door had her eyes. That was the first thing. Her mother's hair was more gray than Lynda remembered. Her hands were healer's hands, scarred, practical, permanently stained with the faint ghosts of plant compounds. She was thinner. She was also, unmistakably and completely, Clara Bonner, and she looked at Lynda in the doorway of the cottage, and she said nothing for a very long time, because she was doing what people do when something arrives that they have stopped letting themselves hope for. Lynda said, "He lied to both of us." Clara said, "I know. I found out 2 months ago. I have been trying to find a way to reach you that he could not intercept." They stood in the doorway of the cottage in the afternoon light, and Lynda thought, 11 years. All those mornings at the end of the lane. All those nights she had closed the drawer because opening it was too costly. All that quiet grief that had calcified into independence because independence was at least something she could control. She said, "I have a great deal to tell you." Clara stepped back from the door. "Come inside," she said. "I will put water on." Lynda went in. She stayed 3 days. On the first day, she told Clara everything. Harlan, the Ember Court, the smoke, the carriage, the palace, 5 days with a king who listened in the dark. Clara listened the way she had always listened, fully and without interruption, and when Lynda was done she said, "Tell me about the king." Not, "Is it safe?" Not, "What will people say?" "Tell me about him." Lynda told her. On the second day, they worked side by side in the cottage's dispensary, preparing remedies for the town's winter season, and it felt like the most natural thing she had done in years. Her hands remembered. She had not known she missed this until she was doing it again. On the third morning, she woke up before light and went out to the low stone wall and sat on it in the cold and thought. She thought about the palace and the library and the south garden and a man who had ordered the right candles without being asked. She thought about evenings by the fire and conversations about things that mattered. She thought about a door that was never locked. She thought about standing in the stable yard with a full leather bag in her hand and a king looking up at her with something carefully controlled in his eyes. She thought about what it meant to choose something rather than escape from it. She had spent most of her life in motion away from things. Harlan's plans, Harlan's management, the ceremony and the smoke and the borrowed dress. She was good at motion. She was fast and she was smart and she could find the exit in any room. But she was tired of exits. She wanted a room she had chosen, not been put in, not maneuvered into. A room she had looked at and decided, with both eyes open and no debt and no smoke and no one arranging the furniture beforehand. She went back inside. She wrote 2 letters. The first was to Harlan Finch. It was short. It told him that she was aware of the debt and the arrangement, that she had no intention of satisfying it on his behalf, and that when she returned to collect her belongings she expected him to be elsewhere. There was no anger in the letter because she had burned through the anger on the wall at dawn, and what was left was simply the clean line of a decision made. The second letter was to the palace. It said, "I will be there tomorrow. Please do not send anyone to meet me on the road. I would like to arrive on my own." She arrived at the palace gates in the early afternoon on the 4th day. The same guards as before. They recognized her. They opened the gate without a word. She rode in alone. The courtyard was quiet. She dismounted. Emmett appeared from somewhere and took the mare. Leona Cross was at the door, and she said, as though Lynda had simply stepped out for a morning ride, "He is in the council room. Shall I tell him you are here?" "No," Lynda said. "I know the way." The council room door was half open. She could see, through the gap, the long table and the rows of serious faces, 6 or 7 men and women in council dress. And at the head of it, Ignis, in the dark coat she had begun to associate with the hours of the day when he had to be entirely king and nothing else. He was listening to a report from a man across the table. His expression was composed, professional, closed. She pushed the door open and walked in. 6 faces turned. The man giving the report stopped speaking. Ignis looked at the door. He looked at her. And in front of his entire inner council, without any control over it at all, his face did the thing she had been watching for 5 days, the quick, unguarded opening, the thing he kept behind all the composure, present for 1 full second before he brought it back under. She had been studying that face long enough to read it. She said, "I apologize for interrupting. I will wait." Clyde Voss, sitting 2 chairs to the left, opened his mouth. Ignis said, very calmly, "We are finished for today." He stood. "Clyde, the Eastern Border Review will continue Thursday." He looked at the rest of the table. "Thank you all." They filed out. Clyde Voss was the last to leave. He paused at the door and looked at Lynda with the expression of a man who has spent 12 years solving problems and has just encountered one he cannot calculate. Then he left. The door closed. They were alone in the long room. She said, "I found her." "Your mother?" "Yes." She crossed to the table. She stood on the opposite side of it from him. The same way you stand at a table when you have something important to say and want the solid weight of a surface between you and the weight of saying it. "She is alive. She is well. Harlan lied to both of us for 11 years, and she spent 11 years thinking I had chosen not to know her." She paused. "I am going to bring her here. She is a gifted healer. The Palace Medical Wing has 3 open positions. I checked before I left." Something crossed his face. "You checked?" "I did." "Before or after you decided to come back?" "During," she said honestly. "I was building the case while I was still making the decision. That is how I think." He looked at her for a long moment. The amber eyes, steady and careful, and not cold at all. I want to stay, she said. Not because of smoke or debt or what anyone else arranged. Because I have been in this palace for 5 days, and it is the first place I have ever been where I felt like a complete person and not a managed one. Because of the candles in the library and the garden in the morning and the conversations that go places I did not expect. She held his gaze. Because of you. Not the crown. You. He did not move. I am not agreeing to a selection, she said. I am not agreeing to a ceremony. If I am here as myself, healer's daughter, ward of no one, with opinions about pack law and a habit of saying everything in the drawer. If that is a problem for the court, I would like to know now. It is not a problem for me, Ignis said. The court is not only you. No, he said, but I am the Alpha King, and if I tell the court that Lynda Bonner is here because I asked her to be here, and that the arrangement is between her and me and requires no ceremony and no smoke and no one's approval but ours, the court will adapt. He came around the table. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the careful way he was holding himself still. I am asking you. Not fire. Not tradition. Me asking you. She looked at him. At this man who had sat in a dark carriage and listened for 20 minutes. Who had ordered the right candles. Who had sent for Miranda Doolin without being asked. Who had packed a leather bag with enough money to let her leave freely. Who had always left the door unlocked. Yes, she said. He reached out and took her hand. Just that. Just her hand in his. In a council room full of empty chairs, with no witnesses and no ceremony, and the afternoon light coming through the high windows, ordinary and warm. She felt her fingers close around his. Outside, somewhere in the courtyard below, a door opened and voices drifted up, the ordinary sounds of a palace going about the business of a day. Life, continuing, unaware that anything had shifted. But it had. In the east breakfast room, a pot of tea would be made at the usual hour and 2 cups would be set out, and the door would be left open. And that would become, not by ceremony, not by fire's choosing, but by the accumulated weight of 2 people deciding every day to stay, the shape of something that lasted. Harlan Finch lost the house. He wrote twice in the first year. The letters were about the debt, which Lynda did not pay, and about the dignity of the Finch name, which she had never believed belonged to her, and about what her mother would think, which was a calculation so poorly made that she did not answer it. She did not hate him. Hatred required a certain kind of ongoing attention she was not prepared to give. She simply stopped, leaving the drawer open in his direction. Clara Bonner came to the palace in the 3rd month. She arrived with 2 bags and a casebook full of remedies and the expression of a woman who has been quietly remarkable for 20 years in rooms too small to contain it. The palace medical wing had, within 6 months, a reputation that drew healers from 3 border territories to study under her. She and Lynda ate dinner together every Sunday in the South Garden, at a small table Emmett had stopped pretending was a temporary arrangement. Clyde Voss adapted. He was good at his work and he was not, at heart, a cruel man. Only a practical one who had confused practical with right for longer than was useful. He and Lynda disagreed regularly about council procedure, and he eventually admitted, in a council meeting where she had out-argued him on a border trade law for the 3rd consecutive session, that she was better at this than he had expected. She said she was better at most things than people expected. He laughed, which surprised both of them. The Ember Court was not held the following year. This caused considerable discussion. Ignis addressed the council directly. He said the selection tradition had served its purpose for 5 centuries, and that its purpose had always been the continuation of a stable kingdom, and that a stable kingdom did not require fire to make its decisions for it when its king was capable of making them himself. He said the law would be reviewed. He said the review would take time because good law always does. He said anyone who disagreed with this position was welcome to bring their argument in writing, and he would read every word. No one brought arguments in writing. Pearl McGraw, the young woman with the pearl earrings whom Lynda had never learned the name of until she became a regular guest, told Lynda, over tea in the library one afternoon, that the night of the Ember Court had been the most frightening of her life, and that when the smoke had moved away from her and toward the back rows, she had felt something she had refused to name until now. Relief. I want to be chosen, Pearl said, but I want to be chosen by someone who sees me. Not by fire. Yes, Lynda said. Exactly that. On a winter morning in the 2nd year, Lynda stood at the east breakfast room window and watched snow fall on the south garden and felt the weight of the room around her. The familiar weight of it, the particular warmth of a fire that had been lit at the same hour every morning for 2 years, the sound of Ignis coming down the corridor with the slight unevenness of step that meant he had been in the training yard before the sun was fully up. He came in. He sat down. He poured 2 cups of tea without looking at the pot. She said, "You are thinking about the Eastern Border Review." "I am thinking," he said, "about whether you are going to tell me I was wrong about the trade agreement." "You were wrong about the trade agreement." "I know." He picked up his cup. "Clyde also said I was wrong. Clyde and I agree approximately once a season. I want it noted that this is one of those times." He smiled. The small, rare one. Not performed, not arranged, just the actual expression of a man who is where he chooses to be, with who he chooses to be with, and is not pretending otherwise. Outside, the snow was coming down heavier. The south garden was white and still. Somewhere below the window, Lynda could hear the faint sound of the medical wing opening for the morning. Her mother's voice, carrying up through the cold air, greeting the first arrival of the day. She wrapped both hands around her cup. She had not chosen any of the things that brought her here. She had not chosen the borrowed dress or the ceremony or the smoke that curved toward her in the great hall. She had not chosen the horse that threw her or the ditch or the dark forest road. But she had chosen to get into the carriage. She had chosen to talk. She had chosen to stay the first night and come down to breakfast and walk in the garden and open the drawer and say the things that lived in it. She had chosen to leave, and she had chosen to come back. And she chose it again now, every morning, in this room, at this table, with this man who had been a stranger in the dark and was now the most familiar shape in her world. The fire burned. The snow fell. The tea stayed warm. Some choices do not announce themselves. They simply accumulate, small and daily and entirely yours, until one morning you look at the life around you and you understand that you did not stumble into it. You built it, decision by decision, door by door. And the building was the whole point.